Hello everyone and welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at some vintage cycling gear, specifically cycling helmets. And if you were riding around in the 1980s, you might have had something like this strapped to the top of your head. Let's check it out. When I started riding in the early 80s, nobody I knew wore a helmet. My brother Paul had one of the leather hairnet style head coverings, but he only wore it a few times. The pros didn't wear them, and the helmets I saw advertised looked bulky and impractical, but a revolution in helmets was about to take place, and they would become lighter, more practical, and more stylish as the decade progressed. Today we're going to be taking a look at a few that helped redefine cycling headgear. The first head protection I became aware of was this, the Bell Biker. The Biker was introduced in the mid-1970s and by today's standards was large, heavy, and didn't cut it in the circles I ran around in. All that aside, the helmet sold well, and its hard outer layer and ice cooler foam insert was no doubt protective and certainly an improvement compared to a hairnet helmet. Here we see the dubious and rather crude strap connection system. I had the same type of setup on my toddler pool float back in the 1960s. Well, thinking about it now, these metal rings might actually be more secure than some of the plastic fixtures that are on later helmets. The helmet fits well enough on the head and has a unique venting system, but its size and weight make it too much of a hassle to wear on my vintage bike rides. It's also been reported that the overhang on the front of the helmet makes it difficult to see when you're down in the drops. Next is a rare bird, the Hanna Pro. This was one of the earlier helmets to be introduced, and it's also one of the heaviest I've tried. While it has a similar foam insert as the Biker, the outer shell means business. It's thick and heavy and really feels much more like a motorcycle helmet than a bike helmet. This is another one that's so heavy that I haven't tried riding with it. The Hanna Pro helmet was selling for $38 back in 1981, and what you got was pretty substantial for the money. It's got a nice Fastex connector and real leather strap adjustments. This helmet also fits well on the head, but the weight! Anyone that complains about having to wear a modern cycling helmet because of the weight should strap this puppy on for a ride around the block. The vents are also pretty small, and while aerodynamic, I wouldn't recommend it for hot days. And now we come to what I think was a true revolution in bike helmets, the Bell V1 Pro. The V1 Pro was introduced in the early 80s, and it looks like it was designed to resemble the hairnet style helmets. It was light, stylish, well vented, and with a thick foam insert under light outer shell, very much resembling today's modern helmets. As a matter of fact, I ride V1 Pros on most of my vintage rides and find them no less comfortable than my modern helmets, and with a thicker foam insert, dare I say more protective? Here's the first version of the strap connector, a strange, rather lightweight plastic latch that doesn't inspire much confidence. The Pro wasn't cheap, and it sold for around $40. Nashbar sold it for $36. The helmet sits kind of high on the head, but it's smaller and slicker looking than most of the other helmets of the time. The more modern version of the V1 Pro included this nifty vent in the front that could be adjusted. The V1 Pro came in a number of different colors, but I really like this yellow. Here's the same helmet in black. The only color I don't have is the elusive blue. Here's the later version of the strap connector, a surprisingly effective design, and one in which if you can't remember which way to lift the buckle, it becomes very difficult to remove. I've spent more time than I'd like to admit trying to unbuckle this buckle. And here's the more modern V1 Pro on the head. It looks like it's a little smaller and sits a little lower. Here's an original box for a V1 Pro. You can see they were really doing a hard sell on this helmet. Irregardless, none of my cycling buddies back in the early 80s were going to spend $40 on a bike helmet. Heck, most of my group picked up our bikes secondhand for $200 or less. But no thanks to us, the V1 Pro was a big success for Bell, and they sold them for many years. Success has its costs, and one of them is copycats. There were any number of other helmet manufacturers that copied the V1 Pro design. Here's a Durango that does a spot-on job at lifting the look of the Bell. It does have a thicker insert than the Bell and has a Fastex connector, which I think may be an improvement over the interesting latches Bell was using. Here's a closer look at the Durango strap connector. It looks a little larger on the head than the Bell and is a little more clunky in appearance, but seems to be well made. You can see how much further it sticks out behind the head. And here is the Avenir. It borrows heavily from the Bell design, but is a little more modern looking and has a unique finish. Smaller venting and a harder outer shell set it apart. It also has a thicker foam interior. The Avenir really looks like a quality helmet, and I would have been glad to rock it back in the day, wallet permitting. The Avenir has a modified Fastex style fastener. The helmet sits low on the head and looks like serious gear. Here's an Avenir ad from 1986. It looks like they didn't slouch with the advertising budget. To add insult to injury, the ad is in the inside front cover of Bicycle Rider magazine, right across from a Bell V1 Pro ad. No shame. And now we come to Vetta. If the rebel forces, or even the Empire's stormtroopers, were to ride bikes, they'd be wearing Vetta helmets. This Italian company had a real flair for original designs, and their helmets from the 1980s made a real style statement. This is the Vetta Corsa. They also made a Super Corsa, which had a larger wraparound vent in the front. Both were well made and fit the head well. I love the color of this helmet. And here's the ubiquitous Fastex connector. The Corsa sits low on the head and also extends further back behind the head than most other helmets of the time. Here are some old Nash Bar ads, and we can see that the Corsa sold for quite a bit less than the Bell V1 Pro. I'd say it's a deal considering its quality. But Vetta didn't stop there. If this doesn't say Star Wars, I don't know what does. I wasn't able to find out what the model name of this Vetta was, but I'm going to call it the Pill Bug. Complete with its own visor, this unique helmet has a wild venting system and the most over-the-top strap buckle I've ever seen. It's virtually a mini seatbelt. For your next Death Star attack, we fully recommend it. And here is the seatbelt style buckle I was talking about. Incredibly heavy duty for a bike helmet like this. On the head, it resembles a motorcycle helmet, although it's not heavy considering its size. And look at that back of the head protection. This helmet would look right at home in a science fiction movie.
license and registration.
So there you have it, a look back at some of the earlier helmets of the 70s and 80s, just as helmets were becoming more accepted and more wearable due to their evolving designs. Helmets have become a part of most cyclists' kits these days. The pros now wear them, and while most people never consider their history or evolution, the older helmets give us an insight into what vintage cycling was like, or in my case, a way to relive memories of a time now gone.
Thanks very much for joining us as we looked at head protection of the past. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.